Many people still have questions after SLED closed this investigation into the way Mother Emanuel AME Church is handling money coming into the church after the tragedy on June 17, 2015. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I speak exclusively with Andy Savage, one-on-one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores.
Andrew Savage, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, Quintin, it's always so great to be with you. You know, I've enjoyed you over the years. I was wondering before we started to this, how long have we known each other now?
At least 25 years.
Isn't that terrific?
Yes, sir.
What a friendship and what accomplishments you have made over the years. I remember we used to be at Channel 5 right on East Bay Street.
That's right.
How long ago was that?
Yeah, 1996.
And yeah, you would always hang around the news studio, and now you're the newsman. Now you're the guy.
You guy, I never knew this was going to happen, but thank God. Obviously, I interviewed you for Quintin's Close-Ups last year about the developments regarding Felicia Sanders' granddaughter and trying to get the church really to help her out financially. Where are we today here in March of 2020?
You know, it's a sad situation, Q. I mean, I don't know how to express this. The public would perhaps understand it better than I do, because I don't understand how a Christian religious organization can be so indifferent spiritually and financially to the needs of its flock. You know, what a disappointment Emmanuel has been, and what a disappointment the leadership of Emmanuel has been. We're coming up on 5 years in June. This child who experienced being in the middle of the 77 shots, who experienced being covered in the blood and bodily fluid of her uncle Taiwanza, who experienced being covered in the blood and bodily fluid of her auntie, and had to listen to the screams, the hollers, all the final life sounds of all these people that she went to church with, you know, who on a Wednesday night was in there studying Mark. And the church has absolutely continued to ignore her. The child has never seen a representative of the church. Never. To comfort her, to wish her well, to give her spiritual guidance. And the church got, we know, millions of dollars. The church admits that they got $3.8 million. What did they do with it? They think that it's their money. I mean, the audacity of the pastor of Emmanuel to think that he's a victim when he wasn't even there, wasn't anywhere around, yet he claims to be the victim, and the building itself claims to be a victim, yet a grandmother and her 11-year-old grandchild at the time of the shooting, who have gone through exhaustive trauma, mental anguish. The granddaughter who was hospitalized in Texas last year at the Children's Psychiatric Unit in Houston for 4 months, never got a phone call, a card, anything from the church, who now is in a long-term care therapeutic community, out of state, has never received a buzz of a phone call, a text message, nothing from the church and its leadership. And of course, everyone else who was involved, who lost a loved one, received the sum of $150,000. Yet Felicia, the grandmother of this child, who was present at this table, just like this table, almost exactly the same dimensions, sitting here, the child sitting here, they covered under, right where the camera is, was Taiwanza. Aunt Susie was right over here, just killed 11 shots to Susie, 11 shots to an 86-year-old woman. A son who stood up and begged for mercy, said, "There's no need for you to do this. We mean you no harm." Bam, bam, bam. The mother of that child, the niece of that man, zip from the church. Nothing. And they won't even respond. I've written them so many letters, I can't tell you now. Since I've last seen you, I've been in regular contact with their attorney. And nothing. Not a hint of compassion from these people at all. No, not even a phone call. You can't write a card. You can't write a note. We're thinking of you. How are you? We're with nothing. Just totally unchristian attitude.
And I want to ask you, because a lot of people are wondering this, what do you think is going on with the budget and the rebuilding of Emmanuel AME Church as you sit here right now?
I've read in the paper this week, I'm so glad to see that they're collecting millions of dollars for this monument. Well, I think that's a good thing to do, and I think the people that are behind it are well motivated. I see they're even going to have a bench put out there for the survivors. The question is, this 11-year-old child, much like Polly and much like Felicia, are living memorials to what happened on June 17th. And these living memorials have been totally ignored. I mean, it's just like a stone is more important than the living body of those who survived. I find that I'm not against the memorial. I don't want to speak in ill terms about Mr. Darby and all those others who, are really behind this and doing it. But you have to wonder why the church is keeping sitting on all these millions of dollars and not reaching out to help in the mental health issues that are being suffered by this child. Can you explain it? I mean, is anybody in the audience able to explain it? The church can't explain it because they've been asked over and over and over and over again to help this child, to reach out to the child, to reach out to the grandmother. Nothing. The grandmother who's 7th generation member of Emmanuel. This pastor showed up, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? He's not Emmanuel. He doesn't represent Emmanuel. Emmanuel is the parishioners, the people who attend Emmanuel. It's not the structure. It's the people who attend it. And they really have just turned their back on these people who have been so harmed for being in Emmanuel.
What would you, Andy, consider success as far as reclaiming some of the funds that were allegedly misused? And do you think that a civil lawsuit will be coming as far as regaining funds for the granddaughter?
Well, there's a fine attorney in town who brought an action early on. We weren't willing to participate at that time because you just don't feel good about suing the church. I mean, it's church, mosque, temple, whatever is supposed to, I think, be untouchable legally, unless their conduct is so offensive that you have no other choice. And Emmanuel, the leadership of Emmanuel, the pastor, the bishop, the leadership within the church, have acted so unconscionably that it looks like a lawsuit is inevitable. I can tell you, Quintin, I'm not going to give up on this child, and I'm not going to give up on the grandmother. We've tried to be reasonable with the church. We've begged them. We've asked them. We've done everything we can not to continue this, and they just ignore us. They don't even have the decency to contact us back again. They know they're wrong. They know that they got these multi-million dollars. It wasn't given to them to paint the church, to fix the termite damage. That's not what the intent of the people who gave the money was for. It was to help those who were victimized by it. And Emmanuel was the entity. So they didn't know the victims' names. They didn't know the child's names. They didn't know Felicia's name. They didn't know Polly's name. So they wrote a check in the care of, to be in the trust of Emmanuel. And Emmanuel just has continued to abuse that position of trust that they were placed in, and they've breached that trust. The audacity of the current pastor to say that money was sent for the church. Who thinks it was sent for the church? If they were killed, if they were slaughtered at a bus station, do you think that Greyhound or Trailways would be looking for the money? I mean, if they were killed at the store downtown, do you think that the store would take the money and it would be their money? I mean, it's just preposterous. It's unconscionable It's so unchristian of the leadership of Emmanuel to have the audacity to line their pockets with millions of dollars and ignore the basic health needs of those who suffered the most from that event.
And I know the past Secretary of Mother Emanuel appeared to have been hardworking and honest, according to some people, with her know-abouts as to who should have handled the vast amount of money that was coming in daily, and even with the present pastor. But yet the public seems to think that she was wrongfully terminated. As an attorney, do you know whether or not she was compensated for her termination?
No, she was, I mean, it was disgraceful for what happened. The arrogance of the new leadership that came into Emmanuel is beyond, it's beyond, whatever that means. I mean, it was just, I mean, you can't believe that this situation happened. She saw what was going on. She saw the money being put in people's pockets and leaving. You know, they found checks all over the place. Clearly, the money was stolen. There's no question about that. The question is, how do you prove it, who took it, and whatnot. But the money I'm talking about is the money that was accounted for, that was banked by the church, the $3.8 million. We know that there was a lot of money stolen because it was such a chaotic situation. I'm not talking about those funds, Quintin. I'm talking about the funds that are in the church's bank accounts today and that are increasing every Sunday because so many tourists come to town and they provide donations to the church because of what happened 5 years ago.
And I know from many of the members I talked to, the church's population, for lack of a better word, is dwindling. Why do you think that is?
It's the way the church treats its people. I mean, it's, you know, it's such offensive conduct. You know, almost immediately after the shooting, you know, Ethel used to work up at the auditorium.
Right.
Ethel was a wonderful woman. She was at the fourth table. She was sitting there with Polly. And her family was so, in her family, Nadine, you know, was the one that led the "We Forgive You."
Right.
It wasn't the church, right? It was Nadine, whose mother was slaughtered in the basement of the church. Nadine was the first one to rise and say, "We forgive you." She was also the first one to say, "Church, we're not going to have the funeral here. We're going up to the north area because you've been so unsympathetic. You're so engrossed in the glory of victimization. You think you're the victim. We're getting out of here, and we're going to bury my mother through the church up in West Royal,
Right.
up in the north area." And, you know, that was shortly after. You know, they were all down there having their picture taken with Obama, and I love Obama. I was glad that he was there, but Obama didn't come here to glorify Emmanuel and the leadership of Emmanuel. Obama came here to pay homage to those who were victimized. And the leadership of the church thought it was all about them. They thought that from the very beginning. They didn't cooperate in arranging the funeral services. They were obstinate. They were just, as I say, very unchristian. And they haven't changed a bit. There was one pastor who came. She was terrific. She reached out to the victims. She gave spiritual guidance to the victims. She embraced the victims. And they put her on her way.
When it comes to the daily funding coming in, what is the process that you were told about how they do as far as bringing the money in?
So I was told originally in 2015 that they were going to conduct an audit and that they would do an audit and that I would get a copy of it. So 4 years later and some months, I'm still waiting. They refuse to cooperate in any way. They won't do anything. You know, it's our money. We have it, and you can't touch it. That's their attitude. You know, it is the money, but it isn't the money. It's the attitude about the money. It's greed. I mean, who does this pastor think he is, that he can go running around the country? He can be on town halls in the presidential election as if he is a victim. Or even that he represents it. He doesn't represent the victims. He's never spoken. He's never, never sent a note, never sent a text message to the victims. So, I mean, it's unconscionable. And how the people of Emmanuel, the good people of Emmanuel that have been there for so long, they know Polly, they know Felicia, and they know the people who were killed, and how they can allow this pastor to continue so-called representing the victims of the massacres. It's unbelievable. They should throw his butt out. He doesn't belong there. He hasn't earned his stay there. If anything, he's violated the trust of every member of that parish. Why will he talk to you?
No. I've tried. I saw him last week at the outside of the debate. He wouldn't speak to me.
He's got the money in his pockets. He's stuffing his money around. He's taking care of himself. He's accommodating his self-interest with the millions of dollars that were given for the benefit of these people. And it's just saying, buzz off.
And I know, obviously, SLED did their investigation.
They didn't do an investigation. What SLED was doing, and I might be responsible for that. It's sort of like what you said, Quintin. You're worried about the money that came in. The days after the shooting, you remember had the outpouring of the community. People were stuffing envelopes with cash and writing checks and putting it up on the door and on the ironwork outside. Right. You remember that? Right. Flowers, money, right. Dolls, everything. Right. So I understand. I don't have any problems. Zero problem. I don't like it. But I'm not looking to hold people accountable because it was such a chaotic situation. What is not understandable, Pastor, is the millions of dollars that you put in the bank and kept for yourself. When you know, as well as I know, that those donations from people all over the world were for the victims of that event. You are not a victim. Emmanuel structure is not a victim. The people who were in the church, that died in the church, that lived through the murderous escapade are the victims. You were nowhere near the church. You are not a victim.
And you feel that SLED didn't do an investigation.
Well, what they did is they looked at this money that was donated and deposited in cash and checks, right? And that money, we know a lot of it's disappeared. That's not the issue. It's chaotic. You can't really. I wish it had been more perfect, but nobody's been through this situation before, so there weren't procedures in place and whatnot. Now, the bookkeeper did speak up. She was shut down. But let's let that money go. The money where there has been a breach of trust is the money that was given to the church as an entity for the benefit of the victims. And the church has taken the position that people all over the world, are you kidding me? Gave the money for the church and not for the victims? I mean, $1.50 to paint where the paint was chipped in the basement, or $150 to clean up the blood of Felicia Sanders or Aunt Susie. Would you like a donation so that you can pay for the Clorox and the mops and the rags that you use to clean up the body fluids from the victims of that incident? Is that what you think you deserve? Take it. But don't take the money from an 11-year-old child who spent the better part of last year in a hospital setting because of what she experienced in the basement of Emmanuel Church.
And with the child being there, obviously there comes financial costs. Where are we with that right now, Andy?
Well, there have been people that are very generous. In fact, the public, I hope, someday knows that people who you wouldn't expect to give money without accepting credit for it is a very popular, in my house anyway, politician who has been extremely generous in personal donation, of which that person has not accepted any publicity, hasn't wanted any publicity. Somebody of very high level politician who has come to sit down with Felicia in her home, who has spent time with her and has never ever asked for any publicity about it. It's a trueness in this politician.
Right.
We all have our issues with politicians, but I can tell you this particular politician has won my love and my support because of the character, the depth of her character. You know who else? Cam Newton. I know he doesn't want me to say that, but he has been so generous on a personal level, not to be on TV or in a magazine or whatever, but day one. Cam Newton, he's got plenty of other things to do in his mind. He's never accepted any public notice for what he has done for these victims. So there are a lot of people out there, both famous, infamous, and not famous at all, who have been generous in their support. But, Felicia is of modest means. They're not broke. Tyrone has a very good job. Felicia had a very good job, career for many, many years. She's been very generous, and Tyrone's been very generous their whole lives to those that were less fortunate than they are. But they're in a situation now, when your children or your grandchild are in a hospital at some distance, you got to get on a plane, you got to get a hotel room, you got to get meals. So life becomes very expensive. It's just not the financial obligation to the hospital and the medical care. There are a lot of personal expenses that go along with that. And it's been rough.
Well, I know you talked a lot about support. After this, looked into from the SLED standpoint, do you support SLED now?
I'm not saying I support SLED. I'm saying that what they investigated is not what I had intended that they investigate. What they did a job investigating was the money, the cash, the checks that were given and disappeared. I understand why they can't find those. What I'm talking about is the misuse of the funds that were documented. The decision they never went back to anyone who donated and said, was this money donated for the victims or to paint the church? So that's my trouble with the SLED investigation. But that's all right. We're going to do that. And, you ask about a lawsuit. I don't like threatening lawsuits, and certainly don't like threatening a religious organization with a lawsuit. I find that to be very uncomfortable, except when the behavior is outrageous.
Outrageous.
And so, we have a minor child. We have plenty of time still to bring a lawsuit if that's what we feel like we have to do. I am not going to give up on this child. I'm not going to give up ever on this child. But I'm hopeful. Maybe a new pastor will come in, maybe a new bishop will come in, maybe there'll be a change of the non-pastor hierarchy of the church, those members of the church that can control and affect change. I don't know where they have been. Members of the deacon board, where have you been? And hopefully, they'll have greater understanding, more empathy for this family. I mean, where she is right now, it's over 6 figures for her treatment. Insurance doesn't pay for all that. And, that's the finance side of it. But just as important, Quintin, as I said from the beginning, the church, they're supposed to be spiritual leaders there, and they have done nothing, not a thing. They haven't they haven't reached out. They haven't done anything to help this family. I mean, how can you ignore an 11-year-old child? How can you do that? You know, how can you just like throw her away? You know?
And I know, obviously, when SLED came in and looked at what was happening at this church, at some point, did anybody recommend, the people who were handling the money at the time take any lie detector tests?
I don't know what they did. You know, I wish that they had understood the meaning behind the investigation was not the people, the little people, so to speak, who are responsible for counting the money. I'm talking about the big shots. I'm talking about the pastors. I'm talking about the bishop. I'm talking about those that have the authority to spend the money that's in the church's bank accounts. The bank accounts that were filled with donations that should have been given to the victims. Now, if they wanted, as I say, to keep, if the structure was damaged in some way, that there's some rational relationship with the money they were keeping, did they have to hire extra security? Well, there are reasonable costs that the church could justify keeping some portion of the money, but just not arbitrarily saying this 11-year-old child, because her uncle got killed, it's slaughtered in front of her grandmother, that she doesn't need to be compensated and the grandmother doesn't need to be compensated because we're going to compensate for Tawanza. What's the rationale in that? It's still a pittance of the money that the victims got, but at least some of them got some money. It certainly wasn't sufficient. The church kept the majority of the funds. I mean, it's just like, are you kidding me?
And why? I read, I believe, in one of the newspapers that basically SLED didn't interview Reverend Goff, Reverend Betty Dees Clark, nor did they interview, I believe, Polly.
Well, probably the most important person to interview, the most honest person to interview would have been Betty Clark, because she really did try to do the right thing. And because she tried to do the right thing, they got rid of her.
Allegedly, she was wanting to audit the books of the church.
Yeah. And so I think she was on the path of trying to find out what was going on. They just summarily released her.
Has the books been audited since this particular pastor been there?
I have no idea. But the history of the prior pastor, right, Goff, it's interesting. I don't know what it means. I think we can speculate on what it means. But he had financial issues in Colombia, but he also had financial issues in New York State. So there was a pattern of behavior that, whether rightly or wrongly, there were questions about how he handled funds. The bishop was aware of that. The bishop never reached out, never did anything with his child or her grandmother. Betty Dees came in. She embraced them spiritually. By this time, they had all left the church. They took up in other religious organizations. But Betty Dees reached out to them from a spiritual sense, trying to make right and do what church leaders should do. And there was a relationship developing between Betty Dees and all the victims that was very positive. And then when she started questioning about the money, the rest of the story.
As you mentioned earlier, we're coming up on the 5-year remembrance of the victims that were killed in the shooting at the church in 2015. Where is Felicia and Polly emotionally these days?
Both of them have left the church. I was with them last week, both of them, or this past weekend with both of them. And, they've worked through it. It's life changed. If you think of nothing else, think of 77 shots in an enclosed, low-ceiling environment, knowing that those shots are taking somebody's life. Think no more than just the audio reaction to that. And then think about the last gasp of breath in the dying declarations. Think about ringing in your ears, "We mean you no harm," of Tawanza. Bam, bam. Think about Aunt Susie at her advanced age getting shot 11 times. You just think about that and living through that, and then wondering, why me? Why did I survive? Why did God allow me to survive this event? Think about an 11-year-old child getting up after the bad guy leaves and wandering about trying to find a cup of water for Uncle Ty, who's dying, who's begging for a sip of water, and just covered in blood and bodily parts, bodily fluid. I mean, think about that, and then it's in your head. You can't remove it from your mind and from your memory. Thinking about the child that you birthed, that you brought into the world, sitting right here at a table with you, studying Mark, saying, "We mean you no harm," and then right in front of you, his head's blown off. And the church just to be totally indifferent and think more about their termite damage and how they need to paint the church than they need to address, number one, the spiritual needs of these people, but two, also assist them in their financial struggles. It's incomprehensible.
With the money that has been coming in recently, have the church been able to take care of the termite and the paint?
I don't know what the church is doing with the money. But I know that they haven't provided any funds to Felicia or her granddaughter. So I don't know. I don't think anybody donated $1 for the termites damage. I don't know about it, but they could certainly have had a separate, fundraising for Emmanuel termite damage. They did that for the elevator. Felicia was one of the leaders in collecting the funds, donating funds for the elevator. Felicia and her family, 7th generation, 8th generation, whatever it was. Now she and Polly have moved on to other religious entities.
Andy Savage, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, thank you for keeping up with this story, Quintin. It's so important to this community.
Yes, indeed. And I hope to get Reverend Manning on here. He's welcome to sit down with me one-on-one, and I'll ask him tough questions.
Well, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Quintin.
Anytime.